Hey everybody, it is August 19th, 2025, here with your after hours recap. So let's just kind of knock out the obvious. Leadership is kind of starting to fall apart. You get another nasty pickup in volume on a name like Palantir, and we've kind of seen this song and dance before a few times, on the way up. And, here we are once again breaking the 20. Do we just climb back up? The difference with this time versus a few others is we've kind of gone through this earnings season and there has really been some fairly ugly reactions. You could look at a name like MicroStrategy recently breaking the 200. You could look at a name like Microsoft with the gap up on earnings and then, fills the gap, breaks the 20, continuation lower towards the 50-day. You could look at a name like Roblox, very similar deal. And this one I'm actually short. So, I'm hopeful for lower in this one, and I'll continue to be short. But, just kind of as you start to work your way through these earnings winners, you kind of start to realize that this earnings season is not really like some of the others where you would get gap ups and just follow through. Obviously, Reddit was a nice exception for a few days where this thing just, gapped up on earnings. Really nice continuation. A-Lab was another nice exception to that rule. But just like, Reddit and A-Lab, they're kind of following and getting pulled under by the weight of the market, which is not too much of a surprise. Some of you guys have been kind of hearing me talk about positioning being wildly extended to the long side, crowded long in terms of COT data in the NASDAQ, and then wildly shorted in terms of the Russell, which, again, surprise, surprise, the Russell outperformed the NASDAQ. So if you're long the Russell and short the NASDAQ, I think that continues to be a pretty fruitful trade, as I've been saying, until positioning is neutral at the very least. And, yes, the Russell can come down, but the NASDAQ's coming down more. And yes, the Russell can go up when the market's going up, effectively the Russell and the NASDAQ, but the Russell is going up more. So there's just this tone of outperformance seemingly day after day. At least for last week, there was outperformance. And then the first 2 days this week, although the Russell came down, it came down less. So if you're long the Russell, short the NASDAQ, yes, you might have given back some money being long the Russell. You made more money being short the NASDAQ. And I still continue to think that is the most profitable trade kind of going forward, at the very least until positioning is neutral. I don't really have to talk about too much more out here, guys. It was a nasty, nasty day all around. We can kind of just, we'll just go through a few names, obviously, and NVIDIA, and I posted a little message about this. This has earnings coming up, and this chart here reminds me so much of Apple in 2023, where you kind of just get stuck in this frozen rope, this channel, where it's just seemingly every single day, you get back above the 200, you put in a little flat pivot, and then seemingly every single day, just higher and higher and higher, grinding higher until eventually it breaks. And yes, it was on earnings. Yeah, please don't mind the dogs. Could you guys get going? Thank you very much. And so, that's Apple. It reminds me a little bit of what NVIDIA is up to right now, where it just, grinds and grinds and grinds, finally breaks the 20, has earnings coming up. And then, my thinking is a bit of a pause here, a couple of weeks, months, quarters of sideways is, something that is in the cards. I think people just forget. You started to hear all the analogs of, this is going to make 1999 and 2000 look like child's play, and that's fine. All the analogs are good, but the problem is when you get to earnings season, names are getting their asses kicked, and analogs stop working when you realize on earnings, things aren't really going as you expected. So that's just kind of been an observation, whether you talk about a name like Sezzle, where you gap down on earnings and then bear flag, or a name like Dave, which was an earnings winner last quarter, and it also looks like it's trying to roll over, or, you name it. We talked about this one quite a bit. Your Groupon, where you gap up on earnings and then, a pullback from there. And even obviously a Duolingo, which has been a total kind of catastrophe ever since earnings as well. Or if you look at Coin on its earnings, this one was pretty disastrous as well. I mean, just everywhere you look, it's just disastrous price action. Really over the last few weeks for earnings. Even look at, these software names like NOW, where you get the gap up and then just a, complete failure, now living below the 200 simple moving average. Sure, a little bit of a blip higher, but when you start residing underneath the 200, I always kind of say, just leave it alone. Don't touch it. Don't think about it. Don't do anything with it. And, look at what some of these cybersecurity stocks have been doing. You break the 50 simple moving average and just steady lower. And it's just kind of the theme right now. Software applications been kind of weak. I've kind of been, I tried to short Palantir on the first red day setup. Unfortunately, I got stopped out of this thing. I shorted it on 8/11 at 184. I got stopped out at high day 187. Of course, it ends up rolling over. And I'm just effectively, I don't take it again on the 13th. Paper cut loss for what could have been a superb trade, but, not an issue. I'm not really too stressed about it, but obviously massive unwind, filled the gap, lost the gap up from earnings, has a date with the 50 simple moving average probably as soon as tomorrow, considering we're gapping down to 153.5 in after hours. And, guys, it just is one of those scenarios where if you think every dip has been a buy, every dip is a good dip, at some point, every dip is not a good dip, and you start to deal with positioning issues, and that's what we've exactly got going on right now in the NASDAQ. Again, it is a crowded long. We will see what data looks like at the end of this weekend, and we'll see if, maybe some of these bulls in terms of, positioning have kind of come off that positioning for the NASDAQ, and we start to get a little bit closer semblance of, neutral positioning. I doubt they can come off of their long positions that quickly. My guess would be lower, and then price action is kind of showing lower is in the cards. So a few more names. Meta, absolutely disgusting past few days. Yes, we're resting right on the 20, but you are gapping down overnight. Probably has a date with the 50, at the very least 720s. Apple, another one, hanging in there, doing its best to be the glue for the market at the moment. So nothing entirely wrong with this one just yet. Has made a nice move from the pivot, finally living back above the 200. It's about the only good one today that didn't really implode. Microsoft, obviously, from its earnings, no good, losing the 20. Like I said, probably a date with the 50. And we can just kind of go down the list. AVGO losing the 20, hasn't lost the 20, since April, mid-April, since the follow-through day. Robinhood, big reversal today. I did let go of the rest of my Robinhood. Took some off 112, and then took the rest off basically at flat. So, no harm, no foul. A couple bucks made, no big deal. Keep the lights on. Oracle, another one, completely disgusting, nasty, a volatility bar. Yeah, price contracted for a few days, and then nasty volatility as well on the way down. Already at the 50-day, we will see what tomorrow brings. You really don't want to see these names losing the 50 simple. From there, that's actually where you really can start a sell cycle. And I would, urge anybody to go and look at a name like Duolingo and what can happen when you lose the 50. It's like, the move's already been plenty big down. It's down 100 points. Can't go lower. And then all of a sudden, it does go lower. So kind of keep that in mind when you think about positioning and you think about tech names and where they have come from, where the market has come from. Don't get stubborn to think that every dip is a buyable dip. One of the best ETFs at the moment is the XLP. And like I said, these are a bunch of names that really none of us want to own. They're slow turtles, but probably the nicest base. You're filled with your Costco's and your Walmarts and your Kimberly Clarks and et cetera, your Philip Morris, and the slow ones. So your grandparents are likely to be outperforming us for the next several weeks. That would kind of be my guess. A little bit more damage, obviously a Reddit. Nothing entirely wrong with this one just yet, but again, a bit of a gap down overnight. You will be opening up below the 10-day. Probably lower we go would be my guess. And this is just all has to do with, selling begets selling, buying begets buying. Again, remember where your market has come from. You kind of think about something like the NQ or the NASDAQ. This is just a little blip down, right? The market, in my opinion, is completely fine. And even if you kind of came back to retest, these earlier year highs, the February highs, the last year highs, and you came down and undercut the 50-day, there's going to be, again, massive carnage in individual stocks. And so don't go chasing the bottom out of these things, but it will create awesome opportunities on the other side of when the pullback is done. It kind of feels like this is the start of a real pullback. Again, I have no clue. I've been trying to get myself positioned more on the long side, but I got stopped out of Tesla today. I cut the last of my Oklo today. I got stopped out of Hood today, and I killed TNA, unfortunately. And part of my reasoning for that was I actually had no hedge protection. I had been talking about short the NASDAQ, long the Russell. I was just long the Russell, not short the NASDAQ, so I didn't want to get stubborn. And again, I'm kind of on the outside looking in until positioning gets neutral or until the Russell begins to bounce, in which I will look for a position in the TNA once again. Like I said, I didn't really want to run a pair trade like that, but I do believe that that's probably the best idea. So on pops on the NASDAQ, I think are shortable. And then, I don't know how big of a dip we'll have in the Russell, but I do believe that that can be longed. Again, we'll look at positioning again later this week. But that's kind of my thinking. I just wanted to get mostly cash. I did get mostly cash. I still own ARK. I still have CCL, and obviously ARK got crushed today. I still own CCL. I have a short in Roblox. I have a short in QUBT. And really just, we kind of work our way down the market. SMCI, very poor today. ANET, very poor today. Tempest, very poor today. Just ugly price action. Again, is it fine? Can it go use for some sideways? It can. VRT, kind of nasty today. A-Lab, pretty nasty today. Carvana, nasty today. NBIS, nasty today. But most of these charts, for the most part, are fine. Can use some more digestion. And then maybe they'll be ready to turn back up in a couple of days to potentially a few weeks to potentially a few months. I have no idea. I will personally be looking for the market to pull back a little bit more, positioning to get a little bit more neutral, to get a follow-through day in spirit, basically, unless, we get a 10% correction, which I don't know if that's coming. And then, we'll look to buy the names that have been holding up best from there. So we'll just continue to take it one day at a time. Anything else that really seemed notable? Like I said, it's the names that none of us really want to own that acted fairly. Best. Walmart doesn't look all that terrible. Names like Kellogg. I don't know. I don't really care for like Mondelez chocolate. Mondelez. This is another one that was up today. It's just a bunch of these XLP names. I'm trying to remember what other stocks I looked at, but I made a tweet about it. I was kind of going through that ETF, and like I said, it's a bunch of names that we probably don't care to own. But boy, this XLP sure does have a big base, and almost feels like this can be the ETF that outperforms for a little bit. Until maybe the NASDAQ's ready to run back up. But GEV was another one. Prior leader also continues to get hit. Date with the 50-day upcoming. So, yeah, that's pretty much my thinking. Focus on the leaders. Palantir was a leader and potentially still could be a leader, but it was a leader. It's not really showing leadership qualities at the moment. Hood was a leader, getting smacked. AMD, Meta, Tesla. You name it, and these names are kind of getting hit at the moment. So I don't want to try and catch the bottom. I would rather volatility subside, right? Let them bounce, let them show you if they're going to be tennis balls. And I'm still comfortable potentially playing the other side of the market if I can find myself in a good setup, or maybe the market decides to push for a few hours or a day, and then looking against the declining moving averages to potentially get situated on the short side. Otherwise, I've got a couple of shorts. I've got two little longs that I'm comfortable to hold for now. ARC, I will only be riding this thing for a close of the 50-day. If we close below the 50-day, I will officially be out. I mean, I've been holding this thing for, just over 2 months now, almost 2.5 months. So, has the fat lady sung? I'm not entirely sure. But, guys, please remember the NASDAQ just made a 40% move off the lows. It taking a month digestion would be not that long, considering what the reactions has been like on earnings. Something even longer than that, like 2 months, a potential quarter of nothingness, especially if NVIDIA gets hit on earnings. If NVIDIA gets hit on earnings, you might as well, come back Q1 prepared to execute. So that's just kind of my thinking. I don't want to get too cute with trying to buy dips and think every single dip is a generational buying opportunity. I don't come from that school of thinking. I think risk first. I don't need to own the bottom. I don't need to own the lowest price. I don't need to guess how cheap something is. Focus on groups, technical setups that you understand, and then aligning yourself within a market that's actually pushing higher so you can gain cushion on your brand new position. If you can't get cushion on your brand new position, with a 10% portfolio position, you shouldn't be sizing things up either. So probably smaller size, wait for a follow through day in spirit, and then, try and get yourself positioned from there. But for now, kind of hands off, lots and lots of red flags, in particular on the positioning side of the market, as I continue to repeat. So please just be careful out there. Even gold is breaking the 50-day. Right, so my assumption is that some of these stocks too, the gold and silver miners, they can start to get kind of whacked as well. I don't really like to see things hanging out below the 50, especially not after these really prolonged up periods. Bitcoin, similar deal. Ethereum is also crowded on the long side. I don't really see any edge here in Bitcoin potentially losing the 50, a potential double top, and then MSTR losing the 200 simple moving average. I made a post about this a few weeks ago, and MSTR very, very reminiscent, this price action of what we saw in 2021. Just a big move up, months of lagging price action, eventually breaks the 200, and it is over with, folks. So please don't try to time a bottom when a stock is below the 200 simple moving average. It's just a fruitless game. Please look at this prior price action in 2021. You get this spike. You get months of lagging price action. Eventually, you break the 200. Could we be here like December of 2021? Maybe. And then what does this thing proceed to do? Big stage 4 decline. Gets absolutely crushed for 80% plus. And then here we are again. Big vertical move. Months and months of lagging price action. And then, are we going to go, for a big stage 4 decline, maybe something back down to, might sound wild, $150 or something like that. I don't know. I personally don't care. I don't have a dog in the race. I am comfortable playing both sides of the market, but please, don't try and assume what the lows on anything are. Nobody does. So hopefully you guys stayed safe today. I know today was a bit of a pain in the ass for me getting stopped out of a bunch of longs, but for the most part, it was a fairly flat trade in Tesla. It was a small little winner in Hood for me. Oklo, I just had a small piece of my remaining shares from $58 that I finally let go, and TNA ended up just being a small little loss. So really no harm, no foul. And then I did get short QUBT, so getting at least paid there for my headaches and my troubles, and hopefully Roblox has got a little bit lower in it as we break the potential 50 simple, and just kind of gauging futures markets right now. They're not looking all that hot overnight. So we'll see, one day at a time, and I will see you all. No pre-market prep for me tomorrow. Unfortunately, I got to go drop off my car to get my rear windshield replaced on my truck, kind of cracked the glass. So I won't be on tomorrow morning. I'll be live in the room on the stream. And if not, I will see you guys all Thursday morning for pre-market prep. Cheers.